I love about that is if there was a Neil Gaiman sort of brand identity or whatever, nobody would let me do this. And as it is, my publishers go, yeah, it's funny, we love it, people will buy it, it's by you. Nobody knows what I'm going to do next. Often not even me. So I'm allowed.
Along those lines, you were allowed to do not one but two Doctor Who episodes, which were both phenomenal, very well received, and very popular. How long had you wanted to do something like that?
Oh, let's see. What am I now? I'm 52, and I saw my first Doctor Who when I was 3. So 49 years, I guess. I mean, I definitely thought that the coolest thing in the world was Doctor Who between the ages of, 3 and 9. And then, as I got older, my conviction that the coolest thing in the world was Doctor Who waned a little. I'm in my late 40s, early 50s, and I discovered that actually I was right the first time. It actually was. Doctor Who is the coolest thing in the world.
What were the two experiences like?
Essentially, a script is a blueprint. And it's like a blueprint for a house. It's like an architectural diagram. And you give it to people, and sometimes you say, well, what happened to this stuff? And they go, we didn't really have time. We ran out of time. That stuff had to go. And you go, what about this? And it can be a little bit puzzling sometimes as a writer. You feel a lot like an architect who gets to walk around their house that they've designed and go, I'm sure in the plans I didn't put the toilet in the middle of the kitchen. And they go, yeah, we know. But, somebody thought it would be a good idea, and we figured we could cover it up by painting it purple, but that hasn't really worked either. So there were a few more moments, I think, in the second one of painting it purple. But having said that, what I loved was the thing that got me most excited, the thing I loved best, which was just the idea of Matt Smith playing a game of chess with himself, was in there perfectly.
Take my queen and give me back the children. Emotions. Can't you see what a foolish move that was? You've lost the game! Kids, back, now!
Warwick Davis played Porridge just as I dreamed he would. And I got to write a kick-ass Clara, who got to take over a military platoon and make that work and believable, and that was fun too.
We're from Maine. Stephen King is Maine, pretty much.
He is.
And you gave a very inspirational speech last year at the College of Art where you sort of talk about some advice that Stephen King gave you. And I know he also gave you some advice for Ocean at the End of the Lane, but what was the advice that Stephen gave you?
21 years ago, and I was doing a signing here in Boston, and Steve and his family had come down for the day, and they showed up at my book signing. I looked up, and there's young Joe King, now famous as significantly older Joe Hill. He would have been about 20, and he's there with his brother Owen, and they have a note for me from their dad saying, come and have dinner. And I had to say, well, I can't actually have dinner with you. I'm got a signing, and as you can see, the line is still round the block. And they said, well, come by the hotel room, come by the suite tonight, and you can just we'll sit on the floor and eat pizza. So that was what we did. We descend upon the Kings and sit on the carpet and eat their pizza. And Steve says to me, he says, this is pretty cool. The whole thing with Sandman, with Good Omens, the stuff you're writing, you should really enjoy this. Make a point of enjoying it, because it's really cool. It's really unusual. It doesn't happen to everyone. And I said yes. And then I went back to worrying about it. And I spent at least the next 18 or 19 years worrying. And it probably wasn't until I'd won the Newbery Medal for the Graveyard Book and was, dating Amanda Palmer that I actually went, I can stop worrying. The world is actually a really good place. And that was the point I breathed a sigh of relief and started taking Steve's advice. But he was also, in many ways, instrumental in Ocean at the End of the Lane. I was in Florida, and I've been asked to interview him for the Times newspaper in London, the Sunday Times. So drove across Florida to Sarasota, where they have a winter home, and spent a day with him and with the much older Joe King, and caught up on everything, and was just reminded, talking to him, about the power of writing every day and what it means to write every day, and that, if you're a writer, it's so easy to get dragged into other things, and actually the thing that saves your life is the writing. And that was what threw me back into Ocean at the End of the Lane and why that book exists. I was writing the book with an incredibly small audience in mind. I wrote it for Amanda. Amanda Palmer, my wife, is a rock singer. She's a chanteuse and a songwriter. And in 2012, she went off to Melbourne, Australia, with her band to make an album, which wound up being called Theatre is Evil. And she was gone. She was out of my life for several months. And I missed her. So I thought I'd write her a short story. And the short story was just for Amanda. It was this thing that was going to be hers. To remind her that she had this husband back in America who was sort of pining for her. And then time went by, and I kept writing, and the book kept going, and the story kept going. And I thought, well, maybe it's a novella. It was fun. I'd written the book in first draft. My first drafts are always handwritten. My second draft is when I take the handwriting and I type it out. So what I was doing for Amanda was each night I would read her everything I typed out that day. And it definitely, the process of reading aloud is a really good one for people who want to create fiction. And it's one that I cannot stress enough. Just read it aloud. Find out whether it works or not. That's how you find out. With Amanda, every night I would read her what I'd written. And read it to her in the knowledge that she'd just got back from Australia. She'd had a long day mixing her new album in the studio, and at some point in the reading process, she was going to fall asleep. So I had no vanity and was not worried or upset about her falling asleep.
It really comes from the perspective of a 7-year-old. How did you find that voice?
I was a 7-year-old. It's actually a really interesting kind of voice to get, because on the one hand, you're reading something with 2 points of view at the same time. You have a 40-something narrator who is looking back on the time when he was 7. And mostly I tried to work with a 7-year-old's thought processes and vocabulary. It's only a couple of times that you are reminded that you're getting this from a more distant vantage point. I do remember, as a kid, reading books for kids, featuring kids, by adult authors, and I would read these books and go, you have obviously completely forgotten what it was like to be a kid. I don't know how you could have forgotten. Is there some kind of weird drug they give adults when they turn 20 and suddenly it all goes away? But I'm not going to forget. I want to tell people this thing. I want to make this thing real. I want to make it true. And so for me, the perspective of the 7-year-old in Ocean at the End of the Lane was as true as I could get it.
Are you at a place right now where you can pretty much call up your publisher and say, I'm going to do this today? And they just go, okay, Neil, go ahead and go do that.
Yes. But that's something that I got to very intentionally. That was always very important to me. When I was, 23 years old, I was a journalist, and I would interview a lot of best-selling authors. And I talked to them, and not normally during the interview, but afterwards, over some food, over some drinks. They would start telling me about the book they'd written that their publishers wouldn't publish. These were real authors. These were people you'd heard of. And one of the things that became incredibly important to me back then is I thought, okay, in my dreams, I want to be a proper author. And I need to make sure that that never happens to me, that I do not grow up to be somebody who is allowed to do one thing or is only successful at one thing. And, it was kind of fun. Last week I was talking to, I will not name names, but let's say comfortably one of the 5 best-selling authors in the world. And this person was grumbling to me that all they were able to sell was the series of books that had made them famous and that people wanted. And their other books and things from their backlist and stuff just didn't sell in the same way, and people weren't interested. And I thought, I am so lucky because I go and write books and people trust me and they know that whatever I'm going to do next is not like the last thing I did.